Alright everyone, welcome back to another video of Salesforce Makes Sense. This is Himanshu and we are continuing our journey of becoming a Salesforce developer in our Apex curriculum. Right? This is the Salesforce Developer Masterclass and we are currently on use cases, some very basic use cases. In this use case, we want to create and manage our to-do list. Right? A to-do list is a very important thing that even I have for day-to-day activities. It helps you keep track of your day and it helps you ensure that you are able to achieve something fruitful for the day and you're able to achieve all your targets that you have set for the day, right? So we'll create a method that lets you add and remove what you have done and what you need to do, correct? So let's go into Salesforce and let's try to create a version for ourselves. I'll just close all the methods. I'll create a new method. So now the idea of to-do list is that you need a method wherein you can put your to-do list and then you need a method wherein you can mark them done or in progress. Correct? So we'll create our first add new item, or let's create a new class altogether. Okay, let's create a to-do list Apex class. New Apex class to-do list. All right. And here I need a method to add new items I need to do, and I need a method to update the item that I have completed. Correct? So let's create each method. Public static void add new work item, and then public static void update work item. All right. So for the first one, what we need to do is we need to take a work item. Correct? So what we'll do is we'll accept a work item as the input parameter or the method parameter when we are creating the work item or when we want to add it to our to-do list. Correct? Now, what is this work item? It's a data type. Now, what is this data type? It's not present in Salesforce. It's not account, it's not contact, it's not integer, it's not decimal, but it's telling you invalid type. We will create our own work item type. All right. So what is this? This would be a public class work item, and this would contain some elements, some attributes. So this is basically our class. Let's quickly save it. Now you see that your work item data type is expected and accepted. Why? Because you have defined the work item class and it is able to identify, okay, this is the work item that it is referring to. Now, what we want to have, we want to keep, let's say, a public string to do ID, public string to do name, public string to do description, public string to do progress. So let's say these are the 4 fields that you want to store. Okay. Or let's say we'll call it to do status. These are the 4 attributes I want to store in my work item class, meaning every work item will have an ID, a name, a description, and the status. All right. So whenever I want to add the new work item, what I'll do is I'll add it to a general list. Now, what is that general list? I'll just create a public static list variable, and this would be of type work items. I'll call it to-do list. Save. So this to-do list will contain all the work items with their latest update. Why have I created it on the top as a variable? So that I can use it across my entire transaction across different methods. Okay. So my add new work item will do nothing but simply add my work item to my list variable. That's it. And it will return the updated list. So if it will return the updated list, the data type should not be void. The data type should be of list of work item. Save. Let's try to save it till here. So there's something wrong. What does it say? Okay, it's saved up fine now. Okay, Let's get rid of all these statements and say save. Let's see if it throws any errors or not first of all. So for those of you who are not able to understand what this is, you'll have to see the video wherein I have explained about, classes inside classes, inner classes, right? And we've talked a lot about classes and objects. That's the video you need to see. It's in the curriculum. It's somewhere uh, in the earlier chapters of our curriculum. Okay, and these are all variables or attributes that define this class uniquely. All right, so these are all class variables of which class? Of the work item class, right? And what I've done is I've created a custom data type of my own. So I'm using that data type as the method parameter in my method, and I'm just simply saying that the list I have, just push whatever work item you've received, okay, and return me the updated list. All right, so let's quickly give this a test, give this a try. What we'll do is we'll say to do list dot add new work item. Now I need to give it a to do item variable, right, which is of type work item. So I have to create a new work item variable. Work item equals new work item. I'll instantiate it, of course, and what I'll do is I'll say w item dot add, sorry, w item dot, now using the dot operator I can access each attribute. So I'll say dot to do id equal to 1. W item dot to do name is the name, right? So the to do id should be a integer. It should not be a it should not be a string. It will be an integer, let's say. Now I'll say to do name equals record Salesforce makes sense video. Okay, what is the to do description? I'll say w item dot description equals record practice questions for my viewers. Okay, and I'll put a status to it. I'll say in progress. Okay, so I filled in all the 4 parameters or attributes that are part of my Apex class, and I've instantiated my class with this work item variable w item, and I've just mapped all the keys to it, all the attributes to it. Now I can pass my work item to this method, and this will return me the updated list. So it will return me a list of work item. I'll copy this from here. To do list equals, and I'll just try to print the to do list. Okay, now before printing it, I want to put multiple tasks, right? So what I want to do is I want to create, let's say, one more work item. So I don't need to reinstantiate it. Okay, I don't need to reinstantiate it. What I'll do is I'll simply say to do list dot add work item. I'll put it here. So this will add the first work item. Then I'll use that same instance and I'll override it. So I'll say now this will be 2. This will be shop. I'll say get some new clothes, or let's say get some new gear for recording. Okay, and I'll say this is not started yet. I need to plan it. I need to go for it. Okay, so I'll say not started. So that's work item 2, and I'll simply say again to do list dot add work item. Right now, what this will do is this will add the first work item. This will again add the second work item. Now, if I want to check what is the final answer or what are the to do items that I have, I can call, let's say we'll call another method that simply returns the list of work items. So we'll remove the return from here. We'll just allow it to add it here, and we'll create another method that would be of type list of work item, and I'll say retrieve to do list. This will not accept any parameters because I just want to return whatever is my updated to do list, which is this to do list, and I'll say save. Let's try to save it first of all. Does it save up fine? It saves up fine. And now what I'll do is I'll simply call this method. I'll not call the add new work item because I've called it to add the to do list, right? So I'll simply call this method and I'll retrieve my result in the to do list variable and I'll debug it. So let's try to execute this entire code snippet. Okay, let's say execute first of all. So there's an error. It says invalid type work item. Where does it say invalid type work item? This one right here. So now This is a inner class. So how can you access it? You can access it by calling the parent class, correct? So to-do list dot work item equals new to-do list dot work item is how you'll have to instantiate it because it's a inner class, right? So you cannot access it directly. All right, so after making some changes, what I realized is that since this was an inner class, right, we'll always have to instantiate it by calling the outer class dot inner class. That was one. And there was some problem with how we were calling the retrieve to-do list method. So I've just gotten rid of it and I was just trying out certain things and I've just renamed this variable to-do list to to-do items. Because to-do list is the class name, I did not want to conflict the class name with the variable name, right? And one more thing I've added here is this particular instantiation of the list. I did not want it to be null just for safety purposes. And now if we try to execute this, this executes fine, right? So we are now able to add two work items or two to-do items in our to-do list. Now what I want to do is I want to retrieve, right? So now let's try if the retrieve works. Maybe last time what I did was something wrong. So list of work item equals, I'll just paste my method here, to-do list dot retrieve to-do list, right? Let's try to now debug and execute what comes under work items. Let's say execute. So it says invalid type work item, the same error again, right? So what I'll do is I'll simply update this as to-do list dot work item because again it is an inner class, and I'll do the same here. Let's try to see if this works fine. Let's save the class first of all. Let's see if that is working as expected and it's saving up fine. Yeah, and now let's try to say execute. So it executes fine now, meaning the return type was not matching, right? It should be to-do list dot work item because it's an inner class. And if you notice now, the debug log tells me and shows me my entire wrapper, right? You see that it has the data of what all I had entered, the ID, the description, the name, and the status. And then there's another one right here. So what I want to do is, let's say I've retrieved this to-do list items, right? So instead of returning the to-do list items, I also want to, let's say, update my work item, correct? Or let's say I want to update or I want to check how many items do I have. So I can create methods for each one of them. So I'll see public static integer total to-do items, right? What this will do is this will take my to-do list items variable, which would be my entire list, and it will return me the size. So I'll say return to-do list items, which is my static variable right here, dot size. Okay. Now, what if I want to update my work item? So I would want to update a specific work item, right? So I can mention which work item do I want to update. So I'll provide two parameters to my method. I'll say the work item ID, which is the to-do ID, and I'll update the status. So let's say I want to update the to-do status. Correct? So what I want to do here, I want to find the work item from my current list. If I find it, I'll update the corresponding status. Correct? How do I do it? I'll say for each work item. So now how do I call the work item? I'll say for each work item, which is to-do list dot work item, in what is my variable? To-do list items, which is this particular variable, right? The static variable. So for each item in to-do list items, if work item dot to-do ID, which is this ID right here, equal to the work item ID that I've provided. Correct? If it matches the ID, what I want to do is work item dot, I want to update the status to whatever is the new value for that particular work item. Make sense? Let's save it. So there's some error here. What is the error? It says comparison arguments. Okay, this should be an integer. It should not be an ID, correct? It should be an integer. It's a number. Now let's try to save it. So work item has been saved, correct? Now let's try to execute this. So what we are trying to do is add two items, then we are trying to see what is returned. So once it is returned, what I want to do is for each work item, I want to retrieve and just check what are the work items because that log was not very clear, right? So I'll say for each work item, system.debug, show me what is the entire data. All right, let's try to first execute this. So I've just called my retrieve to-do list method after adding two work items. So if you now see, it is logging it twice, but both of them have the same data. The first data is already has been washed away. Why is that? Let's take a look. So we added the work item here and then we used the same instance, right? So instead of this, let's use another instance. I think the instance is a problem. Why? Because it is a static instance, right? It is not changing. So what I'll do is I'll call work item 2 as my second instance and I'll add this to my to-do list. Simple. I am not using the same variable because of the static nature of it. I'm using a different variable now and I'm using that to add a new work item. Okay. Now let's take a look what happens with the debug log. Are we getting two different logs? Let's say debug only. So now if you see to do ID 1 and 2 are different. So that was because of the static nature. We were not able to use the same instance, which was the work item variable. Okay. So we created a new instance, just named a new variable basically, created the instance and used that to add the value. All right. So now that our addition and the retrieval is working fine, let's see if the updates also work fine. So if I want to update a specific work item, I can simply go ahead and say to-do list dot update work item. Now let's say I want to update ID 2 and I want to say it is completed, right? So these are the two parameters I'm sending, the work item ID, which is 2, and the new status is completed, correct? So what I'll do is I'll simply print a debug log here just to see what does the item hold. Save. Since I'm not returning any value, let's quickly debug it here and check. So I'll say execute. Let's see what happens. So I've just said execute, and now if I take a look at the debug only, here's 1 and here's 2, right? And then finally, this is my work item. And if you notice, the second item status has been marked as completed. Okay. So the update is also working fine. So it was able to find to do ID 2. See, for this status, it is still in progress because it only found to do ID equal to 2 and updated the status to completed for that particular record. So our update is also working fine. All right, just a bit of caution here. Because you are using inner classes, you have to ensure that you instantiate with the right definition, or else you might have some data type mismatch issues similar to what we faced. Correct? And then here we had to, this was a dummy attempt. Ideally, this will not be a scenario when you are sending data from your front end or from any other trigger or any endpoint. Here we had to just instantiate it one more time so that both the records could be seen in the list. That's it. All right, so that was all about our to-do list. So you can do a lot more here. So you have added a new work item, you're retrieving the list, you've updated a work item, right? What if you want to delete a work item? You can add a new method here to delete, right? So this becomes your entire to-do list manager. Okay, what if you want to introduce more variables or more attributes here? Yes, you can introduce more attributes here. Okay, and you might ask, Himanshu, why did you create the public class here? Because I wanted to use it in this class. If it is something that would be used for multiple classes, you can take this out and create a new work item class and you can put it there. So you can create a new class altogether and you can store this information there and everyone can directly call the work item class. You don't have to use the to-do list dot nomenclature because that's an independent class. It's not an inner class. Okay. What if you wanted to set some values by default? So in that case, you would have to have a constructor here. Remember constructors, we talked about constructors. So what you can do is you can take the integer to do ID, and you can always say this dot to do ID equals to do ID. So you can always instantiate with certain specific values. And when you are defining a constructor with parameters, it is important that you define the default constructor also, right? So these kind of things can also be done. Okay, great. So take a look at this. Try to probably add one or two more methods based on your understanding. Just try to figure out, something more that you can add or remove from here. Maybe delete a item, or maybe update the description of a specific item, or maybe print the entire list, or let's say have a list, have a work item list with something different than strings, maybe a list of string. You can create something for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. For each day you can create a to-do list, and then you can work on top of it, because you now know collections, you now know operators, you now know conditionals, now know how to write loops, you now know how to instantiate, so you should be able to do it. Okay, so that was our to-do list use case practice question.